Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Hi everybody, my name is Larry Cassidy. I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is February 16th, 1987. And since that day, I haven't had to take a drink of alcohol or any mood-altering chemical that I know of. The reason I say that is because I had a stroke, a mini stroke, the week before Thanksgiving, and I'm not sure what they gave me, but I know I didn't feel too bad once I got into the room. So I do have a little bit of an honest committee here. I got, Dale and his wife over here, and John just came in back there, and Plumback's here somewhere, and I got Roy and his wife, and then Gene from Al-Anon over here. I'm scared to death. Oh, I got Paula right in the front row. One thing that Paula and I notice when we go to these conferences, and I want to tell you how appreciative we are of the generosity and the hospitality that we've been shown since the moment we stepped out of the car and into this hotel. The hand of Alcoholics Anonymous and the hand of Al-Anon has been there for our every need and our every want. And I also want to thank that committee and that Sterling was talking about. I was beginning to think, this morning that this committee was part of the mafia because, you don't see them. Nobody comes forward when anybody says who's on the committee, but things are getting done. And it's wonderful to be here and to be a part of that and to experience sobriety in South Carolina and to be on this stage tonight with gentlemen that were wearing suits and ties to read. Now, you don't get that everywhere. Sometimes you don't get a speaker wearing a suit and tie. But some friends of mine and I, we made a deal early in my sobriety when I got serious about being sober that we would wear a suit and a tie if we were ever asked to speak before a group of Alcoholics Anonymous. And wouldn't you know that I would be the first one out of that group that was asked to go speak somewhere. And I told my sponsor, David, I said, David, I put my foot in my mouth. I got to go talk down in Parkersburg, and we made this deal, and I don't have a suit and a tie. And he said, well, do you have any slacks? And I said, yeah. Do you have a white shirt? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, wear the best you got. Just wear the best you got. Make sure it's clean and wear the best you got. And I said, well, I can do that. And I told Paula, and I was all excited, and I got down there, and I told Paula she couldn't go with me that night. And I said, well, just lay the clothes out, and I'll get them, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. And I went and I talked, and everybody was like, oh, you clean up nice, you look great, oh, he looks good. And all the women was like, oh, those slacks are nice, you look nice, The next day I meet Paula for lunch, and she was like, well, what did everybody say? And I said, oh, Paula, they like the way I dressed. I look good, I look good. And she said, honey, you were wearing my pants. And I said, Paula, I thought my pants had shrunk. I thought you washed them and they had shrunk, and they were pleated in the front. And she said, don't you know what women's pants look like? And I said, well, don't ever tell anybody. So the next time I'm asked to talk, I go ahead and David tells me I need to share that. And it's humbling to share stories like that about ourselves. So I share that story, and I go and I sit down, and I told Paula, I said, oh, they laughed, they really enjoyed it. And she was like, zip your pants up. So I am always so glad that whenever Paula and I are asked to speak together, because I know I'm going to look halfway decent. She's going to help me get dressed. We spoke once at Founders Day a few years ago, and I got this ego, and we were setting up here, and there's thousands of people out there, and I leaned over to Paula and I said, honey, I said, Did you ever, in your wildest dreams, ever think that you would see me talking in front of thousands of people like this? And right before I got ready to get up there, she said, honey, you've never been in my wildest dreams. That didn't really happen. What she really said was, it'll be okay, settle down, it'll be okay, focus on somebody, pick somebody out and look at them, because I was scared to death. This is one of the worst things it seems to me that I have to go through in Alcoholics Anonymous, and just letting you know that, and letting you know that I am going 100 miles an hour, I am full of fear, I am just, I'm beside myself. I'm there, I'm here, and I'm back, and so just please be patient with me, and if you don't like anything I say, we'll talk about it afterwards, or if you don't, but I want you to know that because of sponsorship and because of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, those first 164 pages that outline the program of recovery, I've been able to stay sober. I've been able to put one day after another day, and I've been able to go home, and I've been able to sit down across the dinner table with my wife and look at her in the eye and tell her that I love her and have dinner with her. I've been able to bring a paycheck home. I've been able to work a full week. I've been able to be where I said I was going to be. I've been able to do things that I never thought I would ever do. And it's because of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and the gift of sobriety that has been so freely given to me. And sponsorship. God loves sponsorship. David, my sponsor, who, even though I continued to drink, he gave my wife a copy of the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. She was in Al-Anon, and he said, Paula, you may find something in there. And Paula read it, and one of those, is either a chapter to the wives or to the family, where it says, try this. Try this program. It might make a difference. Even if he continues to drink, it may make a difference in your life. Your life may change. And Paula did that. And she began to practice those principles of the 12 steps, and she began to get serious about her recovery in Al-Anon, and she began to come home, and she began to change. And I seen this change in her, and I thought, my God, I want that. God, I wish I could have that. And that last day of my drinking, I didn't call David, my sponsor. I didn't call, Mr. and Mrs. AA. I didn't call my preacher, my minister. I didn't call my mom or my father. I called Paula because I seen her change. I seen this change in her, and I wanted what she had. And I was willing to do whatever it took to get it. And I had to be beaten to that submission that alcohol had to take me there. Alcohol had to take me there. And I've had people say, your drinking drove Paula back to Al-Anon. And I'm like, no, my drinking, and this is hard for some people to understand, but some of the Al-Anons, you guys understand this, you get it. Paula didn't come back to Al-Anon because of my drinking. Paula went back to Al-Anon because she was suffering from untreated alcoholism. She was suffering from that incomprehensible demoralization that this book talks about. She was living that insanity of untreated alcoholism. And thank God that she knew that she had to reach out. And I'm in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous, and Dale and John, these guys know, I'm in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous. I can't get it. I can't get it. What is it about this deal that you guys have that I can't get? And this old timer stopped me once, and he's like, what is your deal? And I'm like, I hated old timers. I hated AA. I hated Al-Anon. I hated the book. I hated you. I hated me. And I said, I'll tell you what the deal is. I can't get this. He's like, well, why not? And I said, I got a monkey on my back. Can't shake it. I got that voice. I can't shake it. And he said, well, let me explain it to you this way, and then you tell me if you can understand what I'm trying to tell you. And I said, all right. And he said, Larry, this powerlessness that you feel, this hopelessness that you feel is called untreated alcoholism. This inability to have a relationship is called untreated alcoholism. He said, in your case, it's like having sex with a gorilla. You're not done until the gorilla says you are. James said I was allowed to say that. That's not a bad one. But when he said that, I could picture that in my mind. I could. I knew what he meant. And I'll tell you how I knew what he meant. I know there's some nasty thoughts going on out there. This is how I knew what he meant. When he said that I'm not done until the gorilla says I am, I pictured myself throwing up in that toilet, praying to God, saying, I'll never drink again. God help me, I'll never do that again. And knowing deep inside, I'm done. I'm done. And then drinking again. I didn't know how to not drink. Those times that I swore to God and that I swore to Paula and that I swore to my parents and my teachers and my employers and my friends and that I am done, I swear to God I'll never drink again. If you would have hooked a lie detector test up to me, it would have been no lie. The thing that separates me from Paula is that Paula knew I was lying when I was telling the God's truth. If you're out there and you're wondering how she can give you that look, that, oh God, when you know that you're never going to drink again, she knows. She knows. Because in our case, if nothing changes, nothing changes. And the only thing about alcoholism is that it gets worse. It doesn't get better. Even if I'm attempting to get sober and things seem like they're going good, it's not going good because I'm not doing anything. I'm making that attempt. I've got to do, and I don't want to step on any toes, but I have got to get beyond just going to meetings. I have got to get beyond that recovery program out there called 90 meetings in 90 days. That does not work for me. I could not make it to that 90th meeting. I would hit number 80. And they'd say, how's it going? It's good. Somebody'd say, if it's not any better, go back out there and drink. Heck no, it wasn't any better. Just not drinking never worked for me. I wasn't one of these ones that came in and February the 5th, 1982 is my first treatment for alcoholism. And, she didn't want me to go. She's like, oh, I can take care of this. I can deal with this. And I'm like, I think it might be a little bit more serious. And they took me up to the hospital. They told me I was going to be in there 28 days to 30-some days. And I got my books, my magazines. And back then they had the big boom boxes. I had a great big boom box. And I was going to go and be treated for alcoholism. I didn't have a clue. I didn't have a clue. I'm getting way ahead of myself. I'm going to be bouncing around. It's like I'm going to be handing you guys a box of jigsaw puzzle parts tonight, and then when you go back to your rooms, you shake it up and you put it all together for me and let me know what you found, okay? That's just the way that it was for me. And I had to chuckle down there last night when Sterling was up here talking about how everything seemed to come real smooth together there at the beginning of the meeting, and the meeting's going to be on time, and everybody's coming in, and he said, I think Al-Anon might have something to do with there's, somebody's in control. And, Paul and I went to Pittsburgh a couple years ago to the Al-Anon International, and I got to see the biggest Al-Anon relapse slip ever. in the world, I got to see it. The hotel that Paul and I was staying at, there was a room that got caught on fire. And the alarm was going off at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I'm telling Paula, we better get out of here. And she's like, it's nothing. I said, Paula, that is the fire alarm. We need to go. Get up. And she's like laying in bed. She won't get up. And I said, I'm leaving. And then finally they came on the speaker, and they said, there's been a fire. Please evacuate. Be considerate. And I'm like, get up. And she's getting dressed by now, and, as we go down them steps to get out of that hotel, there is no, go right ahead, ma'am. You guys ever see that Seinfeld episode where there's a fire and George is getting out? That was me. No integrity there. I was gone. And we got outside there, and there was all these Al-Anon women. And they was in their nightgowns and their underwear, and you know, they was all totally out of control. And I got to, it was one of the greatest slips I've ever seen in my life. And then we went to a McDonald's around the corner to get coffee to get out of the cold air, and there was some guy from Al-Anon in there, and he was in the middle of a relapse, and he threatened to beat me up for crowding in front of him, and it was crazy. It was crazy. I got back to the home group, and I shared that right away. But I want those Al-Anon people, I want those Al-Anon members to know I love you, and that I know that we would not be here alive. And when you hear Paula talk tomorrow, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Either one of us or both of us would be dead had it not been for the program of Al-Anon. And I am not up here to, and God help me the day that I start taking cheap shots at Al-Anon. Because those people, they need to know that we appreciate what they've done to help us, even though my arrogance sometimes doesn't show that. Did I mention I got a home group? Primary purpose group. God. The primary purpose group of Alcoholics Anonymous, I am on fire. I am on fire. And they was talking about meetings of commitment. God. My first home group was the Williamstown Serenity. Well, it wasn't my first one, but it was the group that I got sober in, the Williamstown Serenity group. And God, I love those people. I love those members, and I can see them sitting around that table. But you know what? For whatever reason, I wasn't getting. There was something that was missing. And I'm not blaming on that Williamstown group because, you know, they helped me. You know, they helped me from everything from making a turkey to carrying the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. And about a year or 2 years ago, I come out of the bedroom and I told Paul, I said, honey, I got on my knees and I asked God to help me create a fellowship that I crave because I need something. And it wasn't but a few days later, I had a guy call me and say, hey, I heard you talking at a meeting and you know, would you mind sponsoring me and taking me through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous? And I said, yeah. And a couple of days later, another guy, and last August, 26 of us men from MARIETTA, which is, and you got to know the meetings. This is unheard of. 26 of us men got together for a weekend, and we started on page 1 in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we come out of there on page 164. And we went through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous together. And somebody was like, well, how did you do that 9th step? You couldn't have done the 9th step. I said, sure we did. We went over it, we shared our experience with it, and then it says wherever possible. It doesn't say whenever, it says wherever possible. And we all made that commitment to each other that as soon as we got out of there, we was going to start that amends process. And I remember I called Paula, and I was crying like a baby. You know, I'm a big crybaby. I come out of this cabin, and I looked over here, and there were 2 guys over here doing the 4th step, and 2 guys over here, and a couple over here, and, you know, we're at this beautiful lake, and then, you know, a couple hours later, we're all out there, and we're sharing, and we're doing the 5th step together. People that would not normally mix. Guys that, you know, at one point in their lives, they would not even look over and say, hi, how you doing, at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and here we were, going through the steps. And most of those guys now I sponsor, and not all of them, a few of them I sponsor, and you know, my home group meets on Thursday nights at 7:30 in Marietta on the corner of 3rd and Putnam, and if you're ever there, come in. By all means, come to that meeting. I was, a few weeks ago, or a few months ago, I was giving a talk, and I said, I guarantee you, if you come to that meeting, you will leave there knowing that you've been to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. There will not be any doubt in your mind. I was like maybe 70 miles away from home, and the next week, here come these vans of these people. They come to the meeting. They wanted to check me out, which is fine. And they kept coming. And they took our idea of studying the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous back to Pomeroy, Ohio. And they started a primary purpose group over there. It's amazing. It's amazing. I didn't have anything to do with that. The book Alcoholics Anonymous had everything to do with that. And it continues to grow. And you know, I got, you know, a couple guys that I'm sponsoring. You know, there was one of them that's you know, I've heard it this heeing and sheeing, and I had to talk to him before I come down. And then I got a couple of guys that are you know, they're not getting along with each other, and I had to talk to them on the phone a few hours ago. And then I got a newcomer, Joe, and he told on all of them last night. I talked to him today on the phone. He said, nobody greeted. I said, well, Joe, where was you? Outside shoveling snow. I said, okay, that's good. But I appreciate this meeting. I appreciate this group, and there's something fantastic happening within that group. Everybody has a commitment. Everybody has a responsibility to be there an hour before the meeting. We start an hour before, getting set up, getting that coffee made, getting that little meeting before the meeting. And then we finish up, and then it's about an hour after the meeting before we part our ways. And then I start counting the days, Friday, Saturday, come on Thursday. And that's right where I am today with my sobriety. I am excited about my home group. I came from an alcoholic home. God bless my parents. God bless them. Everything said don't drink. Don't drink. When you see drinking, bad things happen. And my best friend and I, Kenny, guy that you know, we met in the first grade. And I know this is not exactly what we said, but this was the bond that he and I have carried through our lives. And that is, you watch my back and I'll watch your back. And that's the kind of friendship that Kenny, and we made that deal. We made, you know, I'll be your friend forever. We made that on the playground in first grade at the first recess. I don't know why that stands out. But every Saturday, Kenny and I would meet and we would play basketball at the local YMCA. And one day he showed up with this bottle of red, just something red. And I said, what is that? And he said, I think it might be some wine. Now, up to this point, everything said, don't drink. Bad things happen when you drink. You know, we lived beside a bar. Mom and Dad used to come in all hours of the night, knock down, drag out fights. The police would be in and out. You know, it's just typical alcoholic home. They're not bad parents. Untreated alcoholism. Thank God for the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous where I begin to see that. But I reached out and I took that bottle and I took a sip. And Kenny took a sip, and then I took a drink. And Kenny took a drink, and then I took a drink, and then Kenny took a drink, and then that bottle of wine took a drink. And I felt that ease and that comfort that the big book talks about, that comes from taking a few drinks that we see others taking with impunity. And I'm not a well-educated man. Don't let this fool you. I had to look up that word impunity. And it said with no problem. Paula is an impunity drinker. You know the type I'm talking about. You sit down at the bar and they come in and they sit down beside you and they say, I'm going to have a beer and I'm going to go home and cut the grass. And they have a beer and you say, where are you going? I got to go home and cut the grass. I don't understand them people. I say, I'm going to have a beer and go home and cut the grass. It's 2 months and my neighbors are over there cutting my grass. Kenny and I made a deal that day. We were making deals all the time. That we was going to drink every chance we got after that. My whole life, it seemed like, and I've heard it, this hole in the soul. And I first heard that coming into Alcoholics Anonymous. And I felt so at home when I heard that. That my insides never matched your outsides. When I was going to school, I never felt the way Johnny and Jenny looked. When my parents made me go to church, I never felt the way that guy up front there looked. I never felt the way you people looked. It was almost as if somebody had given me a book to life and said, here, you know, when we're kids, you take this and if you have any problems, This is the book of life. You'll find your solutions. And Mom and Dad would come home, knock down, drag out, fight, and I'd run and look in my book. The pages would be blank, and I wouldn't know how to deal with that. Somebody in the family would pass away, and I'd run and look in my book, and I wouldn't know how to deal with that. And it talks about the alcoholic life becoming the only normal life. After a while, I won't know the true from the false. And that's the book talks about, if you come to that time where you're pounding on the bar saying, how did this happen again? What did I do to get this started again? That you were probably alcoholic, and you have probably placed yourself beyond human aid. That means once you have those thoughts, how did this happen? I swore I would never do it again. I have placed myself beyond human aid. That didn't happen to me when I was 25 years old. That didn't happen to me when I was 30 years old. That happened to me probably before I drank. How does this happen to me? What am I going to do? The pages were blank. But when I took that drink, it all came together. Mom and Dad come home drunk, knock down, drag out, fight. How do you deal with that? You drink. You're late for school, and the teachers hold you over, and you know the whipping that you're going to get when you get home, and then you know that when they sober up, it'll probably happen again. How are you going to deal with that? Page 33, you drink. Steve threatens to beat you up after school because you mouthed off to him in first period. How are you going to deal with that? Page 34 says to drink. Drink was the solution. Drink is what kept me going. When I couldn't deal with life, when I couldn't deal with me, when I couldn't deal with that fear, the drink worked. Those promises are what I was getting when I drank. That's what I experienced when I drank, was the promises. Why would I not want to drink? And I began to have a little bit of an understanding about why my parents drank. It's just that they couldn't control it. They couldn't have fun with it. I could. The book says that that's the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. That one day I'm going to control it. One day I'm going to enjoy it. And that was me. I always had that obsession. This time it's going to be different. This time I'm going to get that paycheck home. I was a gambler too. I can remember, my sponsor brought me down here once to play golf. And he had this big condo down the beach there. I almost said down the river. That'd make you mad, wouldn't it? Down the beach, he had this big condo, and it was right around the Super Bowl time. And Paul and I went over to his condo, and the Super Bowl was on, and Denver was playing Washington. And I think Denver may have been favored. And I went over to Dave's phone, and I called in a bet. It was like $440 to win $400. And Dave was like, do you have that money? And I said, no, but Dave, Denver's a sure bet. He said, why can't you just sit down and enjoy this game? I said, all right. So I went back in, and I called, canceled it. I knew the bookie. He was a good friend. I'm canceling my bet. Okay. Boom, Denver, right down the field and scored. I said, David, you messed me up. Why don't you mind your own business? Some of you that probably have been around and know how that game ended. Oh, I thank David. I was ready to kiss his feet when I walked out of that place. I think Washington came back and beat the crap out of Denver. But that was my thinking. That was my thinking. And Kenny and I drank every opportunity that we could, and our deal was that we would bum money off kids, and then we would take that money and we would get a wino to buy us something to drink, and then we would buy him something to drink if the money was left over, and we did this every opportunity we could, and the kids would, at Monday at school, the kids would say, God, you and Kenny were wasted, you were bombed, how much did you have to drink? At the basketball game, a 12-pack. Kenny's like, oh, no, it was a case. I was like, yeah, it was a case. And then, the next week, Kenny would be like, or they'd be like, how much, God, you and Kenny were wasted, bombed again. You were the life of the party. How much, 2 bottles of Boone's Farm in a case. A few years later, well, we didn't drink that. We drank like 2 or 3 beers. I got to tell you that. And then a few years later, I get home after drinking a 12-pack or a case, and Paula's like, my God, you did it again. Come home wasted and drunk. How much did you have to drink? I'd say 3 beers. And I lied, and I lied, and I began to live that lie, and I began to believe that lie. And I can honestly say, and I told my brothers this, that I felt sorry for my brothers at times because they didn't have that escape. They didn't have alcohol. And there's been some pretty messed up things. I barely graduated high school. I get out, I turn 18 years old, and the garbage bags. Throwed all my clothes in a garbage bag and told my dad where he could go and take Mom with him and my brothers, and I hated them. And, I flipped him the bird, and he's like, you go out that door and it'll never be the same. And I said, who in God's name would want it to be the same? And I went and I knocked on Kenny's door. Kenny's married at this time. He's like 18, 19 years old. He's married. He said, what do you need? I said, I need a place to stay. Mom and Dad throwed me out. And he's like, come on in. I got your back. Kenny, that's just till I get a job and get on my feet. A couple weeks, Kenny said, Larry, you got to go. I'm like, what about the deal? He said, oh, I'm sorry. He's like, Larry, I love you. I love you like a brother, but you come home drunk. You want to fight with me. You want to fight with my wife. She's pregnant. We can't have that. No problem, Kenny. Got my green, hefty garbage bag, threw my clothes in it, some of Kenny's clothes, and downtown I went. Ran into a guy by the name of Chuck down on Front Street in Marietta. Paula and I called it the combat zone. She beat the death out of me down there one night. She'll tell you that. She's proud of that. But I ran into a good friend by the name of Chuck. And Chuck's like, what's going on? What's in the bag? I said, my clothes, my stuff. What happened? I said, Kenny threw me out for no reason. I said, he's married now. He's changed. He said, why don't you come to my house and stay for a while? And I'm like, yeah, okay. People like me. I don't understand that. As bad as I was to people, it just seemed like I could always find somebody that would, take the deal. Con, lie, and cheat. A couple weeks later, Chuck said, can you come out on the porch? And I know. I got to that point in my life where if anybody said, come on out on the porch, I knew I was going somewhere. And Chuck gave me the story, you got to go. My parents, my dad had to step over you this morning. You broke the key off in the lock. The neighbors have called. You were hollering and screaming all night, and you want to fight my mother. And all right. So I threw my clothes in the bag, some of Kenny's clothes, some of Chuck's clothes, and downtown I went. And I used to tell people I ended up living on the riverbank in Marietta. Till David got me after the meeting once and he said, how long did you live on the riverbank? And I said, well, I didn't live on the riverbank, David. I was there for a few days. I was there for a while. He said, you need to tell people that. I said, okay. So the next time I told him I was there for a while on the riverbank, and David came up after the meeting. He's like, so how long is a while? And I said, David, get off the riverbank, would you? I was there for a couple hours, all right? And he's like, Larry, he said, you tell these lies and you tell these stories and then you believe it. You can't do that. I'm like, okay, I'll never do it again, David. So I was there for just a few hours. And I hoodwinked these people into, let me move in their trailer, and the same story, saying, get out on the front porch and get out. We're going out of town. We want you out of here by the end of the week. And, I called Kenny up and I said, Kenny, I'm having a going away party. And he's like, where are you going? I said, I don't know. And he's like, well, don't even ask. I said, but come on over. He said, all right. He said, hey, would you mind if my wife's sister came over? She's wanting to go to a party tonight. I said, yeah, tell her to bring something to drink. And, there was about 15 of us. We were living in this trailer. And the deal was whoever got a job got to have that extra bedroom. Well, out of the 15 of us, I got a job washing cars. But I could never make it to that bedroom. I would pass out on that red deck. I would pass out in the yard, on Clarence's car, and you know, I could just not make it. So we're there having this party, and I'm there with this girl that I had told her that I would marry her someday when I was able to buy a ring for her, and you know, so I considered myself engaged. And there comes a knock on the door, and I look out the door, the window, and I said, "Oh my God, can you look at that car?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "That's Vicky's sister, Paula." And I was like, "Oh my God." I run over and I let her. I said, "Come right on in here." I said, "That's a nice car." And she said, "Yeah, that's a nice car. I got it." So I ran back to the bathroom, and I got the dirtiest, cleanest clothes that I could find to try to impress this girl. And I got my bib overalls and an old dirty T-shirt, and I had hair down to here, and I didn't have any teeth. And I go over and I introduced myself to her. And after a while, she's like, "You know, there's nothing going on here. I know where there's a better party than this." And I said, "I'm riding with her." And I started this fight. You know how we do. We start picking an argument, and they get mad, and they leave, and she got mad and left. And you know, I'm out in Paula's car waiting on her. Let's go. And we went to this party, and we had a good time. And you know, it came time for her to you know, I gave her that pitch, and it came time for her to go home. And she's like, she takes me back to that trailer, and I said, "I ain't living here anymore." And she said, "When did you move?" I said, "A few hours ago. They kicked me out." She said, "Well, where are you going?" I said, "I don't know." And I started stalking her while I was in her car. And I told her, I said, when she finally said, "Get out, enough's enough," I said, "I'm going to marry you." And she said, "You're crazy. I don't even know who you are." And I said, "I'll tell you what, if you want to go through with this marriage, and which I know you do," I said, "I want you to pick me up tomorrow at 5 o'clock. I work at Bob Engler Ford washing cars." This qualifies Paula for Al-Anon back in 1977. She was there at 4:30. And I'm sending guys out to meet my wife, my fiance. And they were like, "Thought you was engaged to Serena." And I said, "No, I just met another one." And they were like, "Larry, it doesn't work. It don't work like that." And I said, "Oh, yeah, it does." And her mom was the same way. I'm not going to tell you the exact words her mother said when she took me home to meet Mom, but her mom said, "Absolutely not." But I knew I had Paula. She called me up one day, and you know, I would take her out, and I would try to act decent with her when I was with her, and then when Paula went home, I'd go out and I'd get drunk, and I'd get in a fight. I'd get another tooth that I couldn't afford to lose would get knocked out, or my nose would get broke, and she would say, "What the heck happened to you? When I let you off, you was okay." And I said, "Oh, I fell going up the steps or coming down the steps or whatever." I couldn't keep my mouth shut when I got to drink. But she called me up one day and she said, "You want to go for a ride?" And I'm like, "Yeah, anything. I like that car. Anything to get back in that car." It was all hopped up in the back, had these big mag wheels. And so we went for a country ride. We took beer and we put it in one of them styrofoam coolers and put it in the back seat. I used to love the way the sound of that would squeak when we would be out on them country roads. Reach back in there and get that beer and shake the water off of it and down it, or get the one from the night left below where you just got nothing but water in there and it's all dry and warm, but it's good. It's that effect. And she said, I made a decision that my parents are not going to agree with, but I'll marry you under one condition. I was like, "Oh, I knew it. I knew she's going to ask me to quit. I'm not going to quit drinking. I am not going to quit drinking." She knew what I was when she met me. And she said, "Honey, I love you. And if you get teeth, I'll marry you." And I was like, "Did I hear you right? Are you serious?" And she said, "Yes, if you get teeth, I'll marry you." Thank God for the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, today I own 2 sets of teeth. And I am you got to appreciate the little things before you can appreciate the big things. And I run to the dentist and I told Dr. Reimer, I said, "I need some teeth." And he's like, "Yeah." He said, I can work on the one, or I can work on the ones that you have." He said, "But you do, yeah. And this is what it's going to cost. And I said, oh, Dr. Reimer, I don't have that kind of money. And he said, I'll tell you what. He said, I'll put a partial in there. And he said, every time you get a little bit of money, you come see me, we'll add another tooth. I'm like, all right, I'll do that. And every time I got another tooth, I'd run over to Paul and go, I got it. And we got married. I got teeth and we got married. Just a few weeks after, or a few hours after we was married, I was knocking on her mom's back door wanting to know if I could borrow $50 to get some groceries. And she's like, Larry, I seen people give you money. What's the deal? I seen people giving you envelopes last night at the wedding. I know there was money in there. What happened? Paul and I went out drinking the night we got married. I took her to the bowling alley. Who takes their wife to the bowling alley, for God's sakes? And I'm buying everybody all kinds of drinks and buying, yeah, go ahead and bowl game on Larry and Paul. And didn't even have enough money for groceries the next day. We lived in a trailer. We lived in a trailer that was petitioned off. $50 a week, and we couldn't make rent. You walked in the door, and you're in the bathroom, the front room, the living room, the dining room, and the kitchen, and and it was crazy. Within a couple of weeks, I'm knocking her around. I'm accusing her of adultery. I'm accusing her of things that I seen happen with my aunts and my uncles growing up. I'm accusing her of things that I seen go on and under my own roof growing up. And it's not happening, but I don't know that it's not happening. But something's going wrong. And it's like, I'm working beside Jim here at the plant, and we're making the same amount of money on the hour. We're taking home the same paycheck every week, and Jim's got a house and a car. And we can't even put gas in the car. And Monday mornings at the plant, I would go to the payphone. There's a little corner in the plant. Every day I go by it, I say, thank you, God Almighty, because there was a payphone there. And every Monday morning I would call Paula and I'd say, honey, I am so sorry. God help me, I am so sorry for what I did to you again this week. I am so sorry that I blew all the money. And she would be like, Larry, my God, we've got $2.17 to make it till payday. What are we going to do? And I'd say, I'll borrow $50. I'll borrow $20 off one of the guys, and we'll go to the grocery store, Paula, and we'll get some food, and we'll get some cigarettes, we'll get some gas, and we'll stay home tonight, and we'll watch TV. And then the next day at work, I'll be able to come in, I'll be able to talk to him in the break room about what we saw on TV last night, what the show was. I think it was Dallas at the time. And I said, we'll talk about JR. And I'd go borrow $20 off Brad, and I'd say, Brad, I need to hit you up for 20. And he'd be like, all right, when are you going to get us next week? And I'd get that $20 in my pocket, and I'd start fiddling with it about lunchtime. And I'd pour it out, and I'd look at it, and I'd wad it up, and I'd think, I'm going to go home tonight, and Paul and I are going to have groceries, and we're going to watch TV, and we're going to be a family. God help me get this. God help me get to the grocery store tonight. And by 3:30, I'd think, well, you know what? Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe I can just have a beer, maybe two, and then I'll go get Paul. We'll go to the grocery store. Tuesday morning, I'm calling Paul saying, my God, Paul, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I promise you tonight it's going to be different. I'll borrow some more money, and then we'll go to the grocery store together. We'll go together. This time we'll go together, okay? And she'd say, okay. Wednesday morning, I'd be like, oh my God, Paul, I am so sorry. And the insanity of the alcoholism is for me thinking that it's going to be different. It's not the crazy things I do when I drink. It's not going out there and driving my car into a brick wall and I lived through that one. It's thinking before I put that drink in my hand that it's going to be different. And I end up in a 28-day treatment facility. And, February of 1982. And I get out of there, and I'm on that 90 meeting and 90-day program. I've got 30 days. Paula and I went to an open meeting, and it came her turn to talk, and I said, she's not allowed to talk. And they're like, what do you mean she's not allowed to talk? Who are you? I said, my name's Larry Cassidy. I'm an alcoholic. I just got out of a 28-day program. I got the equivalency to 2 years of sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous. I wasn't arrogant. I was ignorant. I didn't know. That was based on what I heard. I heard get a sponsor. So I got Bill the millionaire, Marietta. And I'd call him up and I'd say, Bill, landlord called me and they want the rent money. What am I going to do? Can you loan me $100? And he's like, read the big book. I'm like, Bill, what's that going to do? That ain't going to pay the rent. He said, read the book. Bill took me once to go give a lead. I put together like 6 months, and I stood up there and I told everybody about how you take that 4th step. We got in his Porsche on the way home. He was like, I didn't know you'd done that 4th step. I said, I haven't. He said, well, why would you stand up there and tell them you did? I said, that's what they want to hear, Bill. And he's like, don't you ever get up behind the podium of Alcoholics Anonymous and lie again. I said, okay, I promise I won't. And I think this time I asked him for like $20. He's like, get out of the car. Go in there and read your book. I said, what the heck is it with that book? And I told him, I said, I fire you, Bill. I don't need you. You're fired. They don't like it when you fire them. I went and I got Professor Bob. Well, I drank at Bill. It was Bill's fault. Wouldn't help me pay the rent. And then I went and got Professor Bob, professor at Marietta College. I just knew that Bob's genius would keep me sober. I call him and say, hey, Bob, Paul's a little crazy. Things are not going good at work. What would you do? Tell me what you think, Bob. He'd say, read the book. What the heck is it with this book? And I would tell people, stay away from those two. They try to shove that book down your throat. And we don't have to take that, do we? And the sick ones would say, yeah, I agree. And I called David out in a meeting once. He was lying in the meeting. He said, if you go back out there, it'll get worse. I said, can I talk? They're like, what's going on? I said, David's lying. He said, what do you mean he's lying? I said, David's never went back out there. How do you know that, David? David said, every time you come back, you tell us. I was in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous for 5 years. David picked me up at a meeting one night, and I don't know what he said. I don't know. But I was like, David, I can't go on. And he stopped at the store and he got some orange juice and some honey. He said, when's the last time you drank? I said, David, I drank on the way to the meeting. I would ask God, if that light's red, I won't drink tonight and I'll go to the meeting. And if that light turned red, I would say, the next light, God. And that was my deals with God. And I would drink on the way to the meeting. I would drink after a meeting. The Williamstown Serenity Group on Wednesday nights was their meeting night. And I can remember sitting out in that parking lot and asking God, please, God, help me go in there tonight and hear something that's going to keep me sober so I don't get drunk and ruin Thanksgiving again. That's why I like being at that meeting every Wednesday night before Thanksgiving. I feel so much gratitude that I can just go home and be a part of a family holiday. But David told me to mix that orange juice and that honey together and I'd take care of that physical craving. He said, but Larry, he said, the prescription for your recovery is in the first 164 pages of the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. I said, David, I've already worked those steps. And he's like, how have you worked those steps? I said, they're on the wall. And he's like, Larry, you take the steps off the wall, you're going to get off the wall results. You can't just read them and interpret what they mean. It's in the book. So I went and I told Paul, I said, David says it's in the book. But I drank that orange juice and honey, and you know what? I didn't need the book. Physically, I felt better. And I drank. And David called me once and he said, do me a favor. I said, anything for you, David? He said, when you get on the drunk you can't get off of, then you call me. And I said, David, don't wait by the phone. And in between that time, Paula had sat down one morning and she said, "You need to know what you did last night." And she told me the most horrendous thing that I'd done. And I got up and I ran. And I wasn't running from what I did. I was trying to run from me. And I went down to the bar and I told Radar, the bartender, I said, "Give me a double-double." And I downed it. And nothing happened. And I said, "Keep them coming." And nothing happened. That ease and comfort was now like terror and madness. And that hole was bigger than it ever had been before. And I would like to say, "Oh God, that was the sign, I knew." But I continued to drink for 6 or 7 months after you went back to Al-Anon, right? And I'm sitting in a bar one night, and Tommy, and I'm not breaking Tommy Cernus's anonymity. He told me I could share his name. But he was sitting beside me at this bar, and he said, "Larry, this is as good as it's ever going to get." And I said, "Tommy, for God's sakes, don't say that. I can't live like this anymore, Tommy. I'm dying." I'd weighed like 130 pounds, and I was just drinking, and I could not drink. And I knew she was ready to leave. And that's when I kept hearing that. This is as good as it gets. And that's when I went to the phone and I called Paula. Off to treatment again. I had so many books and literature from treatment facilities. But I called her and she said, "If you really, really, honestly, sincerely want to stop drinking, you get a cab and come home." And I said, "Honey, come and get me, please." And she said, "No, get a cab and come home." That was the first. First time I believed her. Got a cab and went home. There was a knock on the door. I said, "Who's that?" "Gary Grady." I'm like, "Oh no, Paula, not Gary Grady. Mr. AA. He's got the Gary Grady guarantee. If you don't work the 12 steps, you'll get drunk. If you do work them, chances are you might not." And I hated Gary. He was married to Audrey, Al-Anon Audrey, Mrs. Al-Anon. She had that makeup thing that when she went like that, she just smiled. And I hated him, and they knew I hated him. And I couldn't figure out why he would be the one that she called. But they carried me to another treatment facility that night, and I called David when I got out, and I said, "David, I will do anything you tell me to do. Please, keep it simple. Help me, David, please. I don't want to drink. I can't get off of it." And he's like, "Read the first 164 pages of the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, and call me." I said, "Oh, thank you, David." And I did that. I read it, and I called him, and I said, "David, now what do I do?" And he's like, "Read the first 164 pages of the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, and call me." "Oh, David, thank you. I can do that too." Called him. "Read the first 160. I said, "David, this is too simple." In between these readings, David was carrying me to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. In between these readings, David was sharing little bits and pieces of him with me. I began to identify with David, the way he thought and the way he acted and the way he drank. And we pulled up in front of the house one night, and I'm like, "David, it's not any better. She's still mad." And he said, "Calm down. When's the last time that you committed an act of love, unselfish love?" And I said, "David, we had sex last week." He's like, "I am not talking about that. When's the last time that you've done something for her without expecting anything?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "Go in there tonight and do the dishes." I knew Paula's a clean freak. I said, "Okay." I go in there, and there's a sink full of dirty dishes. And I open up the bedroom door, and I said, "I know what you're up to. Trying to get me to clean this house, you and David getting together." She's like, "You're crazy." But I did the dishes. David told me to get a home group. I got 2. My father was a member of one of them. back to the basics, big book study group, Larry's meeting. Went around town, they'd say, hey, you going to Larry's meeting? Oh, that fed my ego. I collected the money. I had wads of money, carry that money around to meetings. You know, just like that big time gambler, you always have to have that big wad of money. Dad called me and he said, you got a minute? And I said, yeah. He said, I love you. By this time, Dad's sober, got a year or two of sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous. And he's like, people in AA don't like you. What do you mean people in AA don't like me? He said, you can't be a dictator of that group. I said, I'm not a dictator. He said, oh, yes, you are. You can't stand at that door and say who can come in and who can't. Where's the money? I said, it's right here. He said, give it to me. I said, no, it's my money. He said, that money belongs to Alcoholics Anonymous. It should be shared with the district and the area and GSO. So I don't have to take this. And I went to David. I said, David, people in AA don't like me. I don't know why. I'm a member of this group, and I'm doing this, and I'm doing that, and doing this. And he's like, Larry, it's hard being Mr. AA. I said, you think you're Mr. AA? I went and I told Paul, I said, I'm trying to spill my guts to David, and he's telling me that it's hard being Mr. AA. What's his deal? And she said, I think he's talking about you. I didn't like that. I called George, David's supervisor down here at the beach. And I said, AA's going to heck in a handbasket, and David Hybe ain't doing nothing to help it. And he said, Larry, David's a very sick man. You stay with him. You let me know how he does. I called George the next week, and I said, we went to this meeting, this meeting, this meeting. He said, hang with him, he ain't any better. And then he told me, he said, David said, we're going to go down to Myrtle Beach and play golf with George and the guys. And I was like, oh, my God. David, I got to tell you something. David said, Larry, if we can't agree on everything, we can't be friends. If we have to agree on everything, we can't be friends. And he lovingly, again, shared his experience, strength, and hope. David walked me through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. David showed me how to be a member in and outside AA. And it was through his sponsorship that I got active in service, and we went. First assembly that I ever went to, I called Paula and I said, we elected the president of Alcoholics Anonymous today. And she said, honey, AA don't have a president. I said, you wasn't even here. How would you know? And she said, get with David and find out what happened. He'll explain it to you. But that guy had asked me to sit beside him that day, and he had a suit. Pat. And I'll never forget that. A few years later, they elected me delegate for Alcoholics Anonymous in West Virginia. And I run upstairs and I'm crying, and I tell Paula, I said, Paula, they elected me delegate. She said, you still have your suit on? And I said, yes. She said, go get with the new GSR and ask him to sit beside you tonight at the meeting. And I did that. And that GSR went on to stay active in service and was a delegate a couple years ago. And all this is possible through sponsorship, through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I apologize that I went over tonight, but I want to close with this. And this is a card that Paula's mother gave me on one of my birthdays. Not an AA birthday, but a regular birthday. It says, remember the old saying, you've come a long way? I guess that was written for women, but it would have to apply to you. I am proud of you, and I am sure that AA would be the major factor in your lifestyle today. I know that it has been a battle, but as far as I'm concerned, you've got it made. Now, this was the woman that's seen all that. And I'm not going to tell her any different. But what I'm going to tell each and every one of you is that I know I don't have it made. My sobriety, there's a contingency to my sobriety. And it's how I apply those 12 steps to my life daily, not every other month, daily, carrying this message of Alcoholics Anonymous. But this is the part that made me sit in the car and I cried like a baby. And I can remember I was trying to read it to Paula when I come in the house. It says, thanks for all the good things you've done for my daughter. That don't say anything about Larry Cassidy. That says everything about Alcoholics Anonymous. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for having Paul and I down here this week. This Southern Alcoholics Anonymous hospitality cannot be beat. Thank you.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. And if that shows up, the gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.